The Mushroom is the Elf of Plants is a really weird poem. So it's quite strange, really. It's kind of one of her playful ones where she's just kind of exploring lots of strange ideas about mushrooms and kind of curious about how odd mushrooms are, which is true. I often think that mushrooms are quite weird myself. Um, so I recommend reading the poem through and just kind of checking the different things that mushrooms are or the different qualities of mushrooms in the poem. The title or the opening line, "The mushroom is the elf of plants," is just kind of straight away putting us into that magical realm that Dickinson lives in sometimes, where she's thinking about the fact that mushrooms are kind of, I don't know, tipped or pointed a little bit like elf ears, but also the fact that they seem kind of magical. They have a traditional association with fairies. So you might think about that. There's these things called fairy rings, which are quite interesting. You can look them up, but they're basically like overnight, a ring of mushrooms will pop up in an exact circle. And they used to think that this happened because something to do with like a fairy had been there or fairies had been sitting in the middle of them. So yeah, I really love the ending as well. Had nature any supple face, or could she one contemn? Had nature an apostate, that mushroom, it is him. So it's kind of like pointing the finger and blaming and accusing mushrooms of being apostates, which are people who defect from a religion. So nature, in this case, is the religion or the religious sect that the metaphor is using. So basically, mushrooms are unnatural, is what she's saying. If there's any kind of plant or species that was not actually part of nature, or that maybe once was part of nature but defected and left left nature, abandoned nature, that would be the mushroom. So something curious, magical, unnatural, spooky, otherworldly, mysterious and strange about mushrooms is mainly the point of this poem. It's not one of those that is, deeply psychological or anything. It's more kind of playful, but it does still have these messages about, God and the universe and nature and the curiosities that we can find sometimes in nature that are quite strange and unexpected. So yeah, for using the document that I made on this scribbly page, there's a lot of vocab there. It's a very difficult poem vocab wise, so I recommend that you go through that and look at it in detail. And then I'm going to kind of jump into the story, the summary. So she's basically saying that the mushroom is an elf of the plant world. Suddenly it pops up out of nowhere in the morning, as if it's just decided to rest there for a minute. It feels like it's always got a lagging kind of character, but at the same time, it doesn't exist very long. So mushrooms, they don't have a long lifespan. And it juggles plants and vegetation because mushrooms actually and fungi, you can research what they are and how they function, but they're basically part of the process of decay and death. They're kind of a bit gross if you look into them. So they kind of feed off decaying matter, and that's when they pop up. She is kind of right, and I don't know if it was known in her time, but mushrooms technically are in a category of their own, so they're not classed as plants or animals. There's some kind of middle ground between the two. So I don't know if that's just an instinct of hers or if she kind of scientifically read a study on that. But yeah, she has a good feeling for the idea that the mushroom is unusual. So it kind of pops up like a bubble, swells out of nowhere, and then like a bubble pops and disappears as well. And she feels as if the grass is maybe grateful or pleased that mushrooms pop up in it sometimes. And it's like a shoot that comes out of summer. So mushrooms we associate with the season of autumn, and they're basically sort of like, signaling the death of summer, the oncoming of winter, the decay of matter that happens in the autumn season. So yeah, if nature had a supple changing face, or if she could express contempt or kind of condemn someone, if nature had any person who may reject her, then the mushroom, that's who it would be. That's how the poem ends. I find it very whimsical and kind of humorous. The ending of the poem, I think, is deliberately tongue-in-cheek. So it's a very quirky and humorous tone. It's very playful, but it is kind of, on a scientific and biological level, exploring curiosities and truths about nature and the universe around us and the function of different organisms within an ecosystem. So it's got some serious points to it, but it's very silly and playful at the same time. There's a lot of techniques here, and again, on the Scribbly page, you can kind of look through in detail with those. I'm just going to pick out a couple that I really like. So personification of the mushroom obviously is like a good one to start with. It's like a kind of mischievous little elf-like creature. It's a little unusual. So elves, quite often in fantasy stories, we find them almost uncanny because they are familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. They seem like we know them and understand them, but they also seem kind of unusual and not quite like human. So mushrooms are a bit like that with nature. They seem half like they're part of nature and half like they're otherworldly or alien or foreign in some kind of way. There's also an interesting application of a metaphor to the mushroom. So the term vegetation's juggler, I find quite funny. So it's like it's juggling the plants of the world. They kind of throw them up in the air and catch them again, and that evokes the cycle of life and death and the process of renewal that the seasons go through. So I really like that one. You might notice that there's a kind of regular structure, and then there's a sort of build up in the final stanza to the climactic line, the final line, that mushroom, it is him. So it's an exclamatory sentence that the poem ends on, as if she's sort of been building a case all along for the fact that we should blame mushrooms or we should fear mushrooms or something like that. So it's, again, playful, but it is kind of I don't know, like showing a truth about humans, that when there's things that we are afraid of or things that seem unfamiliar to us, we might kind of call them out like that, or shun them from our society, or blame them and accuse them for things. So she's kind of playing around with a human truth about human nature there. So yeah, attitudes, I kind of played around with these as well. When Dickinson's being kind of funny and playful, you might notice my notes get a bit more silly as well, because I just think it's kind of like honest and fair to her nature, because a lot of people focus on the really serious aspects of Dickinson, like, her seclusion and moments of depression or her isolation from others, which are definitely there. But what I find really amazing about her is she's got this other side that's very playful, very funny, very lighthearted, and kind of satirical. So depending on what poem you're studying, I'll shift the register of how I analyze based on if it's kind of comical or more tragic. So with this one, it's comical. Mushrooms are deeply weird. They're strange things. That's one of the main attitudes. There's also that some aspects of nature seem to counteract natural law, or seem to kind of go against other laws in nature. So nature is sometimes contradictory if we observe it on a micro level. But if we look at it on a macro scale, that actually is part of those processes, those cycles that it goes through kind of yearly. And then finally, things that are kind of repulsive, disgusting, unusual, frightening, we should take time to figure those out and to think about them, because they can be interesting. And sometimes if you demystify a frightening topic, it becomes funny and it becomes familiar to you. So she's kind of done that here. She, I think, is a little bit grossed out by mushrooms, but by the end of this poem, she just finds it kind of silly and funny. So there's quite a lot of context to do with naturalism and Darwinism on the Scribbly page as well. So check that if you want a lot more context. And also things to do with Dickinson and her beliefs in magic or her kind of spirituality, because it's quite important. Nowadays, we have a huge disconnect between people who are scientific and people who are spiritual. And that's kind of not a kind of blanket rule. There are a very religious, also scientific people, My cousin's wife actually is very strongly Christian and also a very top scientist. So yeah, you can you find crossover, but generally people who are kind of atheistic and more analytical minded go into sciences. People who are more abstract minded go into more spiritual or kind of artistic pursuits. So that in our modern world, science and religion, science and magic, science and spirituality is split. In Dickinson's world, that's not the case. There's a kind of more of a harmony between those two polarities there. So she's both very scientific and very interested in science, and also very magical and spiritual and interested in magic. You will read around, on the internet about her being an atheist, and she definitely struggled with religion throughout her life. But when you call her an atheist, it's again like kind of decontextualized. She's not the same as what a modern atheist would be, because just because she doesn't kind of believe in her specific church's religion doesn't mean she doesn't have kind of her own spiritual pursuits, and she kind of oscillates and goes up and down with that throughout her life. So yeah, when you analyze this poem, just bear in mind that Dickinson is maybe not Christian, but still very spiritual, and sees nature as a kind of spiritual entity in a way. So yeah, that's concluding this one. Hopefully you found it fun, and I've kind of bombarded you with loads of ideas with this one as well. So take a bit more time to unpick all of that. But yeah, I love this one. This is one of my favorites. So yeah, hopefully you like it too. And thank you for listening. And I'll see you guys soon in a future lesson.